Do you want
my
this
feet
one?
on the ground so that I don't spin, but I think if I sit like this, I won't spin.
I feel like I'm a little nervous because I have like a lot of ideas, but not sure like how to put them into words. Just like how to grasp what the trip was like.
Yeah.
We'll see.
We talked a lot about that yesterday too, with Fiona, of just like what it felt like to come home and to try to tell that story. And Fiona was telling us a little bit about how it, some people asked like, how was your spring break? And you're like, it was good. And then they're like, where'd you go? And she was like, Grand Canyon, went to the Hopi Reservation, the Superstition Mountains, and there's just no real way to explain what each part of the trip is. Like a typical OA trip, it's hard to explain, but then also the experience on Hopi is like even harder to explain. And so you can even just talk about those challenges or like conversations you've had with people. And she was saying it was easier to talk with her parents about it and harder to talk with peers about it.
For sure. Okay.
What?
I'm just thinking.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of like how to start.
Who was the first person who asked you how your spring break was? What did you say?
Izzy. I mean, she kind of understands it more. It was easier to talk to Izzy about kind of
Connection successful.
about how it felt and like the different aspects of being like in such different places, like all within the same like relative location, and like I mean, Izzy understands kind of the like difficult feelings of like each part of it, of like, wow, this is really cool, and wow, this like is kind of sad, and like I was feeling kind of like guilty almost being on the reservation of like everything that I've ever complained about, and like I obviously I understood how like the reservations in indigenous communities as like being or not having enough resources, and like they are at a disadvantage all the time, but then really being there and like seeing it, it's like, wow, they've like come or had everything taken away and it's still being taken like within their own land. It was just really difficult to like feel like I could do something about it, because I mean, we come from an area that doesn't have that, like it's not a disadvantaged area, and us being there was really interesting, but it didn't feel like enough being there. Like once I saw it, I was like, I want to help as much as I can, but we're here for such a short amount of time, and listening to Sami talk about all the different parts of what's been difficult for her and her family and the whole community, it was just like really put a lot of things into perspective of like what should be important to me and what I should be paying attention to in general, if that makes any sense.
And I think like my perception of reservations, like I think it did the way that, at least what I've seen in like media and maybe like a couple like movies, it lived up to it. It was pretty, it's just like not, if I had to like choose where to live, that's not the best place to live in like economically, but like you can see how tight knit the entire community is, because we would stop on the side of the road and Sami would be like, oh my god, no, like you worked for me, like he'd be like, oh, like how are you, like I haven't seen you in years, and they would just get a conversation going, or she literally like stopped in the middle of the road at the post office to go talk to someone, because they're just like such a tight knit community, and I just think like we don't really, it's just like it's a whole different world. Yeah, I agree. I think for me, while we were there, I was like trying to just be fully in it and like take and like see as much as I could and everything like that, but it wasn't until after we had left and we were driving to the Superstition Mountains and we started slowly getting back into like more like developed areas, and there were, especially like right by the grocery store that we were at, and there was like all of these houses and all of these pools and all of these country clubs, where it just kind of like hit me at once, and I was like, wow, like
all of this was theirs, and it was just completely taken from them. And now here we are, and this is what they have now. And I remember saying that to Fiona, too, being just like, it all just struck me then. And then we were talking about a little bit while we were there, too, just like, what is it going to be like when we go back to USD? And just kind of the culture shock of being in the reservation and then coming back to our grand, beautiful, like pristine campus where everybody has like the newest AirPods and like the newest shoes and all this stuff. It was just like such a drastic shock. But while I was there, I do remember thinking like, this is like, I was upset that it was like the situation that it was, but I was still like struck by, like you were saying, the community and the fact that like we kind of talked about it on the trip, where you kind of assume that everyone you meet there would just be kind of like sad or like down in the dumps because of their situation, but actually everyone was like really happy and really like open to getting to know everybody. I don't know.
Yeah, and I also think,
Hello. We can pause because it doesn't make sense to have all the background noise.
Sorry for interrupting.
No worries.
My grandma.
Aw.
Somebody pointed it out to me because she's always on and I just see her like she's here, but then somebody said, "Oh my gosh, your grandma." Yeah.
That's so cute.
Can't reach the floor.
We should switch. I was telling them a little bit about our last 2 sessions with Albert, Amelia, and Fiona.
What did they already answer?
Well, we're kind of just sharing. Actually, a lot of it relates to the changing the narrative idea that we were talking about yesterday, with the like seeing what we saw and then
Seeing what we saw.
not seeing what we saw. How were you? You were just putting it really well. Not wanting to comment on it negatively, but
Yeah.
instead, like, these people are existing and thriving
Yeah.
despite all of the systemic disadvantages.
You can lower it.
Okay. I like
Okay.
being I feel like a director.
And then sort of the culture shock of driving away from the reservation and driving into Phoenix and being around. Do you want to explain what you were saying?
Just kind of like where we stopped before we went into the Superstition Mountains and being like it was like a grocery store in that area, and of just like all of these just like hundreds of houses and like all of the development and the pools and the country clubs and everything, and just like knowing who that land was for before and like what had happened to it was just very like striking coming right from the reservation.
So it makes it, so the impact is important. Like I feel that's huge, right? Because how would you connect that to other times? How are you feeling now? Has it translated into your current, like, I don't remember if I shared this with you, but when they were doing all the interviews when I first came, they asked me about how I saw Kumeyaay or California Indians woven into the fabric of San Diego, and I was like, truthfully, respectfully, it's not. And if you go to Arizona, this is minimal, right? I mean, it's a step forward where you're cruising on the freeways and they have the indigenous representation of the art or the landscape of what it should look like. And some of it has like, they built the freeways with colors that are natural pigment, and they have, like in Salt River, Pima, they have like the mountains and the cactus and just different elements to reflect the community. Some of them have like the men in the maize, and that is Akmel Atam, so those Pipash, the Hana Atam, that's their men in the maize. It's part of their creation story. And so there's a reflection of them there, but when you come here, it's just not, right? So has, I guess, maybe that experience of like quickly leaving Hopi and then getting into urban and you realizing such a big difference, and now you're more connected to what it means to leave a place like that? Like, what are you feeling now or are you in your everyday life?
Yeah, I'd say I've been thinking just now of like, there's such a difference in like learning about these things, experiencing these things, and then like having experienced that, if it makes sense. Like, for me, while we were on the reservation, it was like taking everything in, kind of what Maeve was saying, of like just like really being in that moment and like doing what you can in that moment. And then as we were leaving, I was thinking like, how do I make sure I don't like forget this experience, and how do I make sure this is like part of who I am now, of like what I know and how I think and like my perspective. And so coming back, like, I mean, through the mountains, it was like what we were talking about, like this was their land and we're here and we're recreating, and it felt kind of weird to be like, we're enjoying the land that was, like, it was a lot of just kind of confusing feelings. And then coming back on campus, I was like, what can I do now to make sure that this is still like part of what's important? Like, I keep sharing why this is important, and like this is still happening, and like furthering that kind of narrative there. And then now I'm presenting on the Hopi coal mine, the Kayenta coal mine today
Wow.
in my ethics class.
What time?
Around 5-ish, probably start talking. I can ask my professor if you want to come.
Maybe.
But even like preparing that presentation, it was tricky because I was like, I don't want to get it wrong. Like, I don't want to be presenting this in an incorrect way and like not really telling the right story. But I want to be talking about this because I know about it and I want everyone else to be aware of it. And it's just been like, I bring it up as much as I can, like with my roommate. She's from Arizona. I've told her what I learned, and she's like, it's crazy, like I didn't know that was happening. We drove past her neighborhood on our drive to the reservation. She was like, yeah, I had no idea. And it's just like, I keep trying to figure out what I can do now so that like it remains a part of who I am and what my goals are. And like with the dogs and stuff that we've started talking about, it just, I don't know, I just want to make sure I can give back as much as like that experience has taught me, and that I take advantage of like what I can do and what resources I have to give it back and keep sharing and like moving it forward in that way.
Yeah, I definitely feel that as well. I think you said, like, the way you said it, like, I don't want to get it wrong, and I think that's definitely, like, I was like, oh yeah, like, that is, like, I feel like I've been telling people, like, our experiences that we all went on, but at the same time, I'm like, I don't want to, like, they say, like, oh, really? And then I'm like, well, actually, I don't know. Like, I'm like, I don't know because, like, I don't want to say something, and then, like, it's actually, like, not factual, so I feel like I've been telling people about what we've experienced, but at the same time, like, holding back a little bit, because I'm like, well, I don't want to be spreading, like, incorrect information. But, like, I want to be able to help, like, the Hopi and other indigenous people, and get their voices amplified, but at the same time, like, I think, I can't remember if you were talking about it, or if someone else we were talking about it, that we met was talking about it, but, like, having, like, outsiders come in and all of a sudden be like, well, we can fix this, this, and this, and not talking to the natives who, like, know the best way to go about it. So, like, I feel like I want to be able to help and I want to be able to amplify voices, but at the same time, it's like, well, I don't want to trample over other people's progress. So it's been, like, it's been a tricky line of, like, telling people what I've experienced, making sure I'm not saying incorrect things that they get the wrong idea in their head, but then also, like, trying to figure it all out still, I guess.
Yeah, and I definitely feel that line, like you were saying, and kind of what Fiona was saying about just, like, coming back and talking to our friends and, like, how was your spring break and stuff like that, because it's not just as simple as, like, oh, I had a good break, I went to Mexico and I sat on the beach every day. Like, it's not the same experience, not to say that, like, one is better than the other, but it's just what you chose to do with your time. And just, like you were saying, like, the fear of, like, getting it wrong, or, like, trying to be so careful with my words about how I'm explaining what the reservation was like, because I know that, like, just like one word or like one way to describe something could completely paint a different picture in somebody's head of what it was like and what we were doing, and just trying to like find those words has been hard.
Thank you guys for sharing. We had this conversation yesterday with
Fiona.
No, was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yesterday? When it was just Fiona and us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These days are just really going, but maybe I had the conversation a couple days ago. But we talked about how we can also be better prepared to come back and give like debrief, and we definitely like experience is experience. We want you to apply it in whatever way you want to. If it's too far of a connect, like Hopi so far, like we want to also encourage you to divert your energy locally if that's easier. And everybody that we've talked to at some point has had a similar experience of like not wanting to misrepresent the experience or the people. And I want to say, like, at this point, just kind of having heard it several times, that's the impact that we're going for, or that should be intentional, is now you know not to do that, right? Not to appropriate, and you're going about it more sensitively. And I think the part that we need to figure out, or how to add value to the experience, is to unpack that. Now, how do you go about creating a project in class or a paper without feeling that way? And the one thing I guess I can share, you see me all the time be vulnerable and cry and then talk and then, just be connected to who I am. I had to figure out that was okay for me because I'm emotional. And not an emotional wreck, but I have been. That this is part of my character, and I can cry, right? And then I can come out of it and just keep the conversation going, or and a lot of people say they're encouraged by the vulnerability because they get there and then they don't know how to get out of it, or you think too much about how people are perceiving you. And so I think while we're here in this moment, and not to say, okay, we'll meet with you guys in 2 weeks and then we'll unpack, like I don't want to have you wait anymore. It's okay to then apply it and say, please don't quote me on this, or please know that I'm only speaking from my experience, and definitely do your own research, or come with us on an experience so that you're learning about the lands and the people wherever we're hiking, locally or Arizona or wherever. When you go home, teach them the things that we've tried to teach you, entering your zip code and learning a little bit more, researching. You all have access to the library, which is amazing. I feel like that was actually one of my challenges when I wasn't in academia, when I wasn't taking classes, and then you don't have that rich resource to go into the library archives and then just search Hopi Nation, Hopi sustainability, environmental justice. Like, you don't have the access because it's a paid privilege, right? And so while you're here doing it and people are asking you, encourage them, go here and search for this, and I guarantee, like, it'll feel better that you're also educating other people about how to have these experiences. And then localizing it. Last night I had a history lesson, which was awesome. I invited Stan Rodriguez to the There's More Storytelling, and I didn't expect him to speak, but he jumped up and, he's a
Kumeyaay leader in their community.
He is president of the Kumeyaay Community College. He's also, I'm learning all of this, also teaching at CSUSM. Is that?
San Marcos, Cal State University,
Yeah.
San Marcos.
Yeah, I have no idea. And then the Cuyamaca, is it Cuyamaca? Also, I think he teaches there. He's everywhere. And so after that, he said, do you want to take a walk through Old Town? And I can tell you a little bit about the history. And I was like, yes. And I feel like the same. And so as we're having these conversations, and I was preparing for a presentation to ASG today, I wanted to reference the land appropriately. I keep using Kumeyaay Kumeyaay and relatives, or Kumeyaay ancestral lands and relatives, because it's the umbrella under Kumeyaay is 13 bands, and then there's other identities, like, and I don't know specifically, but Cahuilla, Luiseño, Digüeño, there's a couple more, I think either one or two more. And anyhow, that's just from me learning being here. And so when he was walking through the areas and talking about the history, and the word he used was Nipguay, and it means the other place or the other village. So he was sharing the history, and I was just like, wow, this is crazy. And really envisioning that the hardships, I told you guys about the Pueblo Revolt, and that same thing happened here. And we're on lands where it happened, and it just it reminds me of the spirituality of what we believe when people don't get where they're supposed to because they weren't taken care of properly in our ceremonies. And so I always remind myself that when I'm here, anywhere here, right, but also here and spending time here, that I have to acknowledge that those things are here, and hopefully they're watching and seeing that we're doing this work and having pride in how we're creating this opportunity for students and for recognition of who they are and what happened to them, and that some of this work they get to go home because they see that we're getting it done, right? And you're just kind of feel good about that. But the history part and the art, if you get a chance to go to, have you been to Old Town? And have you gone into that little sandy area where it's like a circle,
It's new.
concrete?
As of last year, it's the Kumeyaay. I forget what it's called.
I don't remember, but
We've done programming down there.
Maddie has an internship at Verona. So I was thinking, even if you guys wanted to connect with her and go visit her on a day, or go visit the cultural center and have her tell you what she's learning there. She picked up a book, and it was so cool because she picked up a book the other day, and it's around Kumeyaay constellations. And that circle thing, it's the constellations. And I was like, oh my gosh. So we had a little conversation, and he said all of them in their language, and it was just like, I felt like you all being at Hopi. And so I keep reminding myself and sharing with him, please tell me if I'm being intrusive, or if it's okay to tell me, because I know in my culture, and then I give an experience of, we don't get access to this knowledge until we're of a certain age, or we accept responsibility in a society, and you go through these traditions, rituals to get there. All these pieces have to come together for you to have access to that. So I know that me asking you don't have to tell me anything. Please know that just because I'm Hopi or Native, please don't feel like you have to tell me anything. And I'm trying to also be respectful of what I'm asking, right? And so I feel like that's good. The same way I told you all that being here and being disconnected from home is helping me better understand what our students are going to go through, how hard that's going to be, how the highs and lows, and figure